family and friends. It's your guy Craig coming to you with the 6th installment of Charges to the Game. And as I mentioned in some tweets about a week and a half or so ago, days are going by super fast. We are going to be talking a little bit about free agency and what to expect from the Chargers this offseason, or should I say what I would like to see from them. In particular, certain players that they would go after, some of my personal favorites. And no, this list isn't going to cover everyone who could potentially be bought in, just some dudes that I would like to see. And of course, giving my opinion on what they would bring to the team and why they make perfect sense. So without further ado, let's get into this thing. And while this is fresh in my mind, congratulations to the Rams and all of that. But Mr. Eric Weddle, listen, if those comments that you made post-game in any way, shape, or form affect the Chargers offseason and the types of players that they can get to come in for next year and years moving forward, somebody send this video over to Sean Merriman and tell him, sign me up. This is never going to change because I'm not going to get any taller, but I'm 6 foot, about 215 right now, still holding a little bit of my holiday weight, but that'll be changing here over the course of the next 6 to 8 weeks. I'll probably be down to about 190, 195. Let him know, if Eric's down, so am I. Bare knuckle, however we want to do it. If he wants to throw the gloves on, that'll work too. Just send me the information and let's put it together, because I'm dead serious about this. If anything that he says somehow impacts my team's ability to make a run towards a Super Bowl, I'm going to take that quite personally. Just throwing that out there. Help a brother out if necessary. We'll see here in the coming weeks as free agency kicks off on March 16th. So shortly thereafter, within those few weeks, we should know what the deal is and whether or not people are not coming because they didn't like what they heard. And from that point on, you can just go ahead and send over the paperwork. Okay? Deal? Appreciate it. Okay, so while the focus of this video is going to be defensive side of the ball in free agency, we still have to talk about the elephant in the room. The potential contract that looms large over the organization and its ability to maneuver this offseason to a specific degree. That is the contract or not of one Mike Williams. I know how unpopular this opinion is, and I don't care because I'm not here to be a people pleaser. You guys know I'm just going to be honest with you. And if you follow me, engage with me, have had any conversations with me about this topic at all, you know exactly how I feel. But for the purposes of the people who may not be super familiar with me, I'm not paying a number 2 wide receiver $16 to $18 million a year. And I understand market value and things of that nature, but hear me out. It would be really easy to fall in love with Mike Williams' performance from last year when you look at it just from what you see on paper. Near 1,200 yards receiving, double-digit touchdowns, looks great, right? But context matters. If you look at box scores from game to game, something still exists the way that it always has, and it's inconsistencies. The difference last year is that his highs were very, very high, so that when he hit lulls, it ended up not impacting his numbers as much as it would have in years past, because he got more volume, ton more catches in the high times, and he was breaking off significantly large touchdowns, especially earlier in the year. But here's the background for all of that. You start off a year in a new offensive scheme that teams aren't technically prepared to defend, and you deploy a guy who was typically a go ball dude into someone who's now running short and intermediate routes. You rock teams to sleep with that early, and you can catch them later on with the deep stuff, and that's exactly what happened, which is why you saw him bust out a ton of uncontested, scot-free 60-plus yards TDs. As the year went on, teams adjusted, and you weren't seeing them as frequently. He benefited from play calling early on and even some later on into the year, because there were still situations where he wasn't accounted for. And I don't want to take anything away from the dude. Like, he was still really good for the most part in clutch moments. So that counts for something. But let's not fool ourselves here. The inconsistencies still exist. He's not a better route runner. He may be running more routes, but that doesn't mean he runs those routes well, because he's never going to be a person who creates separation. It's just not going to be his thing. And it actually hurts me to say this, but the truth of the matter is initially when Palmer was drafted, everyone kind of looked at that as the Mike Williams potential replacement. And I think the Chargers did initially as well. But what that's turned into, and this is what you guys are going to have to pay attention to and possibly come to terms with, Palmer may actually end up being Keenan Allen's replacement. There's no way the Chargers saw Mike Williams statistically having the type of year that he had. They were probably of the mind that they may have to let him go. But I'm almost certain they're going to fall in love with just the numbers, and because they like him so much, and be willing to pay him. Whether it be long-term, franchise him for this year, don't know yet. But if the plan is to sign him long-term, then I think that directly affects Keenan Allen, which to me is stupid, because that's been the most consistent of your wide receiving core. And also, Keenan's skill set is never going to change. He's not a person who relies on athleticism. He's a route technician. And those guys can play in the NFL for a long time. But paying Mike Williams significant money probably spells the end for Keenan Allen here in a couple years. And now Josh Palmer takes the Keenan role. Because technically, Palmer's like the in-between. He's a strong route runner. I mean, like, also aggressive route runner. And that's just going to continue to develop. And he's also a pretty decent contested catch dude. So he's essentially like the middle of the two. So he can play either position. But if they're going to pay Mike, got to replace Keenan. And there's your affordable replacement. So, again, I don't believe the Chargers in any way, shape, or form planned for this to happen initially. It's just kind of how it worked out. And I wouldn't be surprised if you're seeing the last couple years of Slay here. So just be prepared for it. Well, now that that's out of the way, as far as what the defense is going to have to do here this offseason, we all know the answer to this, right? They need a boost in run defense in the worst way. And not only that, DJ needs help. Joey needs help. You've got to service your best players. You can't expect them to be the end-all, be-all. Because if one of them goes down, then what happens? Well, we already know the answer to that question, because there's also no quality depth on the team. It's been super top-heavy for a little while now. And when people talk about how loaded the roster is, they're only looking at it from the top level. Just go down the roster, and what you'll see is like your number 2s and number 3s. Some of them are dudes that you've probably never heard of, depending on how casual of a fan you are. And that's a problem, because you're playing a contact sport. It's not a question of if guys are going to get hurt. It's more of when. And you have to have people who are capable to be ready to go in the event that it happens. So, again, personally, this offseason for me, and I mean, it's not rocket science, needs to focus on getting dudes who can come in and make an impact right away, but also having quality depth behind your starters. And there's absolutely no excuse for it not to happen. What are they, like number 3 in cap space? I see some different numbers in regards to how much they actually have, like in between like 57 to 62. And I fully expect Brian Bulaga to be cut, so that's another additional 10. There's no reason for the proper moves not to happen. So I keep saying this, all of you Tom Telesco apologists, this is your year, or your guy's year. He either gets it done, or there's nothing else that can be said about it. There are no further excuses to be made. Nearly 10 years is more than enough, and It's got to get done here, or it's never going to get done. Well, under his watch. So let's just prepare ourselves and see where this ride takes us. It's no secret that the defensive front left a lot to be desired in 21. So clearly, that is where the primary focus needs to be here, specifically in free agency, because I feel like there are a lot of guys out there that can aid in fixing the problem, therefore freeing up your options in the draft. Because for once, if Tom really wants to go best player available in the first round, he may be able to do so, because that whole thing about him actually doing it now, we know is a complete lie. He never drafts best player available. It's almost always for need, and I dare you to prove me wrong. So in the trenches is where we kick this thing off. And hey, you've heard this name a million times from me since the trade deadline last year, and hell, actually before the start of the 21 season, because there were rumors that the Chargers wanted this man in the first place, and nothing made me happier. Mr. Akeem Hicks. And for all you folks out there that are saying that he's too old because he's 30 plus, y'all are the same people who want Chandler Jones. I guess you fell in love with the 5 sacks to start the season, but I think he finished with just 10. So, I mean, what happened the rest of the year? No discredit to him. Phenomenal player. But look, whatever your excuse is for one person needs to be for the other. I mean, if it applies. You can't just pick and choose where you want to attach things when they, serve your purpose for your argument. So let's just talk about what Mr. Hicks still brings, because when he was on the field last year and he had some nicks and bumps and bruises, there were some things that were undeniable about the man. Still a complete bully at the point of attack. Nasty. Resetting the line of scrimmage. Of course, a plus run defender. And he can still put a guard or tackle into the QB's lap. Now imagine that on first and second down, as opposed to what you currently have in Jerry Tillery, who is not a 4-eye in a 3-4 defense. And yes, they still do actually run 3-4 concepts, and some of them are hybrid. So I know a lot of people also saying it really shouldn't matter because they don't line up in 3-4 the majority of the time anyway. It's mostly nickel, but it's not always the case. Depends on who you're playing, their offensive game plan, and if they're a run-heavy team or not. And Jerry Tillery is a 4-3-3 technique. He just is. Now, we want to pigeonhole him into being a 4-eye. He's going to have to somehow develop an anchor here in the next year. But in the meantime, if you want to cover some of those blemishes up, you get a true bully at that position who can play on first and second down, and then you can make Jerry Tillery what he is. Unfortunately, you drafted him in the first round, but the truth of the matter is, in this defense, he's a rotational pass rusher. Throw him in there on third and let him get after the QB. And you might have something, but that upgrades the run defense significantly. And like I said before, Hicks can still push the pocket, man. So he can give you something on passing downs, even though that's not his specialty. Can still work. So something to take a gander at. And I fully believe that he stands a good chance at being on this team with the connections to Staley from the Chicago days. Just makes sense. So that is first guy for me. And after that, from LA also, Staley connections as well, Mr. Sebastian Joseph Day. Another run game bully. And 2-down guy and a pocket collapser. There's a theme here. To start this thing off, you definitely need to have one or both of these guys. And I'm not saying that it's not possible. I'm thinking for Akeem Hicks, I'm seeing some projections for like a 2-year, like 17 mil contract with like 12 and a half or so guaranteed. That's very doable. For Sebastian Joseph Day, a 3-year, 22 to 24 mil and 14 to 15 mil guaranteed. I mean, you're investing in the trenches where games are won anyway, and that's on both sides of the ball. So right now, that's something that cannot be ignored. And if you can make these contracts work, which the Chargers are adept at really signing guys to respectable contracts and, you know, adding those ripcords towards the end of them and backloading deals. And so they can make it work if they really want. Ed McGuire's like cap genius. So hopefully between he and Telesco, they can put their heads together and find some way to bring a couple of these guys in. Because once again, like I said before, you take care of some of this stuff in free agency, it opens up your options earlier in the draft, and you can get some other impact players at some other spots. And we'll continue to talk about that through the coming weeks through free agency and leading up to the draft. So another trench guy, BJ Hill. Yep, same old. You saw him with Cincinnati as another solid run defender. He may not make it out of there now because I'm sure they're going to want to do what they can to keep that defense together because they spent the last couple of years constructing it. So it doesn't really make sense to allow dudes just to walk. But if they can get their hands on a guy like Hill, that helps as well. Even though Hill's not been a guy who's been a starter for a significant period of time in his career. I think in New York he was kind of in and out of things. And so he's really been able to shine in Cincinnati. I doubt that they want to let that go, but we'll see. As far as what a contract for him looks like, 3 years, 14 to 15 mil. I'm sorry, 3 years, 26 to 27 mil with like 14 to 15 mil guaranteed. So there's that. And when we're talking about edge guys, I'm not sure what's going to happen with Chenna. I wouldn't mind bringing Chenna back because I think he's starting to ascend. We saw him step up and make some huge plays in big time games in huge moments. And I think, you know, it's been a few years, but he's still just scratching the surface. And you go from a defense where he was misused to one where he's starting to come on and it's just his first year. That's one of those homegrown talents that I think if you have an opportunity to re-sign, as long as it's within reason, then you do that. But in the event that Chenna's getting offered like edge rusher one money or something along those lines, I think that money's better well spent with more established guys, particularly Mr. Harold Landry from the Tennessee Titans, who blew the hell up this year. And look, it's another guy that probably won't make it out of there, but these are just my personal faves, and if there's a shot at them, then I think the Chargers should go full force. That's another 3 to 4 year, $45 to $60 million deal. I mean, we are talking edge rushers here, and that's what, 24 to 32 guaranteed, depending on whether it's a 3 or 4 year deal. And you know what you're getting with Harold Landry. Superior athlete on the edge who can drop in the coverage as well, which is something Chenna is pretty decent at. And I mean, like, nasty bend around the edge. You saw that on multiple occasions this year. Had an awesome performance and is going to earn every penny of his new contract. Here's a name, though, that you guys are probably familiar with, and it's a guy that I think has been miscast his entire career in Minnesota. Anthony Barr. Former UCLA guy, so he get to come back home, but outside of that, he looks like a 3-4 outside linebacker. Freaky athlete. And he's also not a liability against the run, and you could probably get him for not very much. A 1 or 2 year deal, like 14 mil, 8 or 9 guaranteed. Something to consider, because in this event, I mean, if you want, which I think you still should anyway, if you're not going to bring Chenna back, or even if you manage to pull off both of them, I don't know. But if you're not going to bring Chenna back, you could bring him in and still draft a guy to groom, but can still be in a rotation behind him. Something to think about. Like I said, that's not a crazy contract, and he's still got a ton of production left in him. He's one of the best pass rushers in the NFL right now. So if you can get that done, I absolutely believe that you should. So those are the two guys on the edge that I would love to see. So now we got to talk a little bit about the back end. Well, kind of some guys that will be in the box as well. But what I'm looking for here, like with the opposite pass rushers, we get Joey some help. It's some guys to help out DJ. Like, Derwin's got to have a running mate. And I'm not talking about Nasir. Nasir's the free safety. He could play some slot stuff too. But I mean, another dude that you can use interchangeably. If you want to throw him in the box and let Derwin do some roaming elsewhere, put him in the back end, whatever you want to do. But my goal, and I hope the Chargers' goal, that was so poorly said. The Chargers' goal should be to free up Derwin as much as humanly possible to allow him to be a menace within the box, to where essentially offensive coordinators have to play Where's Waldo with him on every single play. And that is where a guy like Derwin will shine. So, first guy up, man. Someone that you saw him kicking you-know-what's with at the Pro Bowl. And there seems to be quite a rapport there. Mr. Tyrann Mathieu from Louisiana. Another Louisiana boy I'm super familiar with from his LSU days. And fun fact, I used to be a personal trainer for his wife. So there you go. Learn something new every day, don't you? A deal for Tyrann is going to be like 2 or 3 years, a little over like 48 mil with like 30 and some change guaranteed. And you know what you're getting with Tyrann. Versatility, instincts, and in tandem with Derwin, that's a nightmare for offenses. There's so many things that you can do, so many ways that you can kind of maneuver them around and essentially disguise and mask defenses, to where all quarterbacks are going to have some real issues, because when you not only have to worry about the pass rush, but when you're identifying who's doing what in the secondary, and when you have two guys who can essentially serve the same purpose, you never really know. And I mean, you can try to do motions or whatever else you want to try to expose certain things, but you can even still cover that up when you have dudes that are both as capable as the two of them would be in that defense. So that would be my number one guy in regards to secondary players that I would want to bring in. And outside of that, you've got cats like, and here's a name you probably won't be hearing a ton about, but makes a lot of sense to me, DJ Reed from the Seattle Seahawks. I'd be looking at DJ Reed as a slot guy, which, by the way, Tyrann could do as well, which makes the versatility thing a huge deal for him, and why a signing of that magnitude would be tremendous. But DJ Reed was an outside corner for Seattle. Here's the thing, though. He's a little on the shorter side. I think he's like 5'9". But what he does really well is he's awesome in zone defense. Kind of his bread and butter. And that is one of the staples of a Staley defense. They are more zone heavy than they are man. And the dude is an animal in run support, like fearless. And that's something else that you're learning about this defense. Your corners have to be able to tackle. ASJ played with no fear early on, and then he got those concussions, and he's a little bit more timid in regards to his tackling, which is why, like, you know, you want to kind of bring in some more guys to help cover up in those situations. Now, I don't know what the plan for Asante is this year. I don't know if they want to keep him on the outside, if they want to throw him in the slot, but if the plan is to keep him outside, you can bring in a dude like Reed, who I'm not sure that he's got a ton of slot snaps, but from what I've seen of him, he could definitely play on the inside. And if you get into a situation where ASJ goes down, you could throw Reed on the outside, and you won't lose a ton. I just think it's a smart signing, something the Chargers need to invest in, because the secondary was a complete mess when we lost those guys. We saw what that looked like. No one wants to relive that nightmare. But again, I think he would fit ideally into this defense, and I would start him out in the slot, see how he fares there. I think he'll do quite well, and hell, having not even played very many slot snaps, I would still take him over Chris Harris Jr. any freaking day. That is without question. So for me, honestly, those are some of the bigger names that I would be looking for in regards to defensive free agency. And there's more than enough bread to make it happen. If anything, this is the year to go and sort of dig a little bit deeper in regards to fixing the depth issues and signing some names for some guys who can come in and contribute right away. The whole thing about Telesco not believing in Windows, I'd rather not get into that again. But let's be honest. We have what we have. You've got a fantastic superstar rookie QB whose stock is only going up. You're going to have to pay him in a couple years. You don't sit on your hands and just wait around and allow things to come to you. The whole hurry up and wait thing is not the direction to go in here moving forward. And I don't care what anyone says. After having watched what the Rams did, I'm not saying that that's something the Chargers need to subscribe to. What we do know is what the Chargers have been doing doesn't work, so it's time for something different. You had two teams that, one went the all-in route with signing a bunch of high-quality names and essentially, in a lot of ways, fortifying strengths. With the Rams, they didn't necessarily need OBJ when they signed him. Turns out, at the end of the day, they absolutely ended up needing him because of attrition. You had Buddy's name, can't remember, went to USC. I can't remember his name right now. I'm drawing a blank. But he was already Cooper Kupp's number 2. He gets hurt right after the OBJ signing. So insert OBJ into that role. And you saw the Super Bowl. I don't think that game would have been as close as it was if OBJ hadn't gone down. That was clearly the game plan. Get him involved early and often, and it looked like they were going to blow that game wide open. Once OBJ goes out, they bracket Cooper Kupp, and Van Jones didn't seem like he was ready for the moment. Congrats to that man, too, because right after he won the Super Bowl, his wife went into labor. So imagine that day. Has to be one to remember for real, though. And ultimately, them stacking up at the wide receiver position paid dividends. At the time, you didn't know it, but it worked out. So you keep your strengths, you fortify those. And, the things that are your weaknesses, you can find. If you want to address those with other players or build through the draft that way, cool. Like, the thing here is the sitting back and waiting for stuff to happen approach. Just allowing really good first-round picks to fall into your lap, great. If that's what you want to do, but you better be really, really good at developing talent in the later rounds, which has not shown itself to be the case. The Rams go without first-round picks, and they find a way to develop those guys later in the draft. And what they don't have, they go out and trade for. They just make it happen. They're always in win-now mode, and being in 2 Super Bowls in the last handful of years is not a coincidence. The Bengals built up their roster here within the last 2 years. You go from a below 500 team to one who is in the Super Bowl the next year. And they just made the necessary moves to have it happen. They didn't sign a bunch of world beaters, but they were key contributors who ended up, really some of them, outperforming the contracts they signed. And other dudes we knew were very good players just from their performances elsewhere. Long story less long. This is the offseason that assuming Telesco's been building up for, and maybe he proves a lot of the detractors, me being one of them, wrong, and he goes out full force and makes it happen. As opposed to just the reactionary BS where there are holes that have been there for a very long time and were neglected, and then he either overcompensates to try to fix them, or, then he becomes super time and pulls off, if you want to say pulling off, some obvious signings. The Corey Linsley signing was an obvious one that needed to happen, just like the year prior, with Brian Bulaga. That was an obvious signing. There were connections there with the coaching staff and stuff like that, so it made sense. But when you going after guys and making them the highest paid in the NFL to fill holes that have been holes for quite some time, then you're doing something wrong. You want to be proactive. You don't want to wait until your team is suffering from an issue that you could have been fixing for quite some time, but you decided to try to go what you felt the tried and true route was, even though your personal performance in that regard has not proven that to be the case. And you end up putting yourself in this perpetual state of playing catch up. It's time to get ahead of the game time. Here's your off season to do it. Prove me wrong. I'm not going to speak for anyone else. And if you can do that, good on you. If not, it's time to move on, people. So, I'll get you folks out of here on this. Appreciate you spending time with me today while I rambled about. You know what? I almost forgot. There were a couple questions that were asked of me on Twitter for this particular episode, so allow me to answer them. So got a question here from Charger Stan on Twitter. It reads, if Joe Lombardi is gone next season, what do you think will happen to OC position if internal signing? Who is the most likely to get promoted? So for me, that as far as Lombardi is concerned, I think there's a strong chance he could be gone next season, especially if Justin Herbert has a real MVP type season, goes on a Super Bowl run. Anything where he just continues to elevate is going to bring other teams calling for Lombardi services. And as you can see, the coaching staff is benefiting from being connected to Justin Herbert because guys are being offered jobs left and right. I'm still hurt about the Frank Smith departure. And you got other guys that are interviewing for jobs as we speak. I think the next logical person would be Shane Day. With his experience with San Francisco and their wide zone concepts and being able to further incorporate that into the Saints offense, which Lombardi brought, makes sense to me. That's if Day doesn't go somewhere else. But then you see all of the people that are being brought in that have connections, like I think it's Tom Arth. I believe his name's Tom, first name. I'm not quite sure. People who are then kind of in line next to take jumps into higher positions. But I think if I had to put money on it at all, I would say Shane Day is probably your next OC. So let's see how that works out. And another question from Lou Guarini. Sorry, man. I talk to you all the time on Twitter. I hope I'm not mispronouncing this, but correct me if I'm wrong. What is the biggest name you predict LA signs? I want to say Tyrann Mathieu, but I'm not. I'm fuzzy on that one. I'm going to go the safe route. For me, the biggest name they sign is going to be Akeem Hicks. And to a lot of people, that may not be a big name, but for what they need, it's a huge name. But if they end up Tyrann, that's going to be my second choice. So if we're going to rank them, the first big name I think they get off is going to be Akeem Hicks. That's where the majority of my confidence is. But, the dream of Tyrann Mathieu is right there. So it's going to be number 2 as far as likelihood for me. But for me, first up is Hicks. So, yeah, man, from here on out, every Charger to the game, I'm going to submit, or if you want to submit questions for me to come on here and answer, feel free. But again, appreciate you guys for taking the time out. This was a long one. Thank you for sticking it out with me. But until next time, next week, not get into the offensive side of things and free agency and some of the things I want to see. You guys can disagree with my thoughts and opinions, but do know that they are all based off of factual information, so don't be pissed at me. Blame the facts. But if not, just charge it to the game. You'll be all right. Catch y'all in the next one. Gone.